We ready? Okay, I'm going to steal 2 minutes on the front end just in case I need it on the back end. Welcome to Wednesday night study, as we will refer to it, WNS. It just kind of allows us to do some more of an in-depth look at some stuff. And so that's kind of how we do this. I want to share with you, like we usually do at the beginning of our time together, just kind of how this fits into what we try to do with the go and the gathering and the growing component. So that when you come here, you understand, oh, okay, so that's how this fits in. So we deeply desire that we as a church understand the fullness of God's plan for us, and that involves us recognizing God has a plan and a purpose, as Mac shared with us last semester, to make himself known so that he can be properly understood and then worshiped and followed. We'll talk about that specifically tonight. That means that we recognize that because Jesus Christ has come, that he then sends us, and there's a go component where we serve and share the good news of who Jesus Christ is. There also is a gather component where we celebrate and find joy with one another as God's people. And then there is a grow component. And that grow component isn't just be smarter, but it is tied to this principle that the Bible teaches, is that the truth about God in terms of who he is and his plan for his creation needs to be properly understood. And so that is why we have not only life groups and not only opportunities where we can come together and worship and maybe have a shorter time in which we are challenged by Ryan or myself or one of the other pastors to go and to be the church. But then when do we sit down and have steak? When do we sit down and really get into it and do more of that? And I think that's just one of the components that we really feel compelled to do here at Sunnybrook. And so this allows us to dive in deeper and to have I would even say this, no one really takes me up on it. It's one of those things where I love to say, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm not opposed to answering them, even if they're really, really complicated. We can always get someone else to come in and answer it if I don't know it. But it does give us an opportunity to just not be sermonized towards, where I'm just taking a text and then breaking it down and then kind of giving it to you in 30 minutes. I'm going to try to actually keep it closer to 50, but it really gives us an opportunity to delve in deeper to it. I think you got your syllabus tonight when you walked in, kind of thick, right? I'll explain to you in terms of why those books have been selected, but they really are designed for us, Kate, to know who God is and his plan. Okay, and to do that well, so that our intellect, our reasoning, our thinking is changed, is morphed, becomes more like proper thinking about God in terms of who he is and how we should respond to him. Then in relation to that, though, and this is the part I want to make sure that we never take lightly, that in relation to that, then we live a certain way. As we're about to find out, the problem that Israel had was they had the wrong idea of God, and then they acted wrongly. And for that reason, faced punishment and judgment. Wrong thoughts, doctrine, which people go, what does it really matter? Yeah, it really matters, doctrine. And then how we live, our orthopraxy, or our practice of our faith, that actually really matters. And how we live is tied to what we believe. And so we're going to delve into that rather deep. So what we're going to be doing this semester, as you can tell by, right now you have absolutely everything you should need this week, or this semester for, I believe, the next 13, 14 weeks. We're going to be looking at Micah, the prophets Micah and Habakkuk. Okay, Micah and Habakkuk. And one of the reasons why I chose them is because it's about 14 weeks long, and so I needed about 10 chapters. So I can't do Isaiah, can't do Jeremiah, can't do Ezekiel. I wanted to do 2, just so you could kind of see a little bit of a different look. And I also thought that not only are these 2 books rather important in terms of Israel's history, like they all are, but these ones have some nuanced differences that kind of help them lump together. They're both written from a southern perspective, meaning the nation of Judah. They are written at different times in Israel's history. So they deal with the problems of the Assyrians that were coming and were attacking and destroying northern Israel, and then the coming of the Babylonians right after that. So it allows us to do some things in terms of looking at them. Truthfully, this isn't one of those things probably where you want to raise your hand, or maybe you wouldn't be afraid to. I've had a number of people already say to me, I don't know if I've ever read Micah or Habakkuk, okay? And if you're going, wow, really? Yeah, I mean, I guarantee you, many of us in this room, even if we've read it, we've probably read it through quickly, we might know like a verse from one or two of them. But these are the books, those smaller ones, right between, say, all the big prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then there's a whole bunch of little ones. We know the story of Jonah. But other than that, Zechariah, Zephaniah, Haggai, Obadiah, Nahum, Joel, Amos, we just know they're prophets, but don't really know how they fit into Israel's history. And so we're going to, first of all, tonight, just look at how should we understand biblical prophecy? Because when I say that to you, hey, we're going to be dealing with a prophetic book, most people are like, ooh, are we going to find out like what the Dewey Decimal System is really all about? And are we going to try to figure out like why they have chips and now in our credit cards, and are they going to put them in our brains? And I was always wondering when the Antichrist was going to come. And I'm telling you, like a lot of that is a rather modern approach to these ancient books that have caused more problems than they have benefit. And so I want to begin by saying, when we pick up these books, whether they're the big ones, Isaiah, and by big I really mean number of chapters, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, or the smaller ones, Obadiah, Nahum, and Joel, they have a designed purpose so that when we're reading it, if we don't know what we're looking for, if we literally think we're playing that magic eye game where you got to kind of not look but kind of look into it, and then do you see it? I had it, but then I lost it. Like so many of us have that mentality when it comes to prophetic books. And then we carry that over into prophetic texts in the New Testament. When Jesus starts talking in these rather large terms about the kingdom of God coming in Matthew 24, and here's how it's going to be in the end, and we're like, yeah, who knows? And then the big one, right? Revelations. And you know that if you say Revelations, you don't know what you're talking about because it's revelation. It's one revelation, not revelations. Yeah, I don't even know why that's there. Really. Like God gave us a book, has at the very beginning, and blessed is the one who heeds, reads, and follows, obeys, literally, the word is obey, obeys the words of this prophecy. God put that in there, gave a blessing, but said, yeah, but you'll never know what's going on. And I meet Christians all the time that totally believe that they cannot understand biblical prophecy. Then I would ask, then why would God give it to us? Obviously. It's meant for us to understand. And not because, wow, did you go to school and they tell you what all these things really meant? No. What we're going to do is study how these books tonight, how these books should be studied. And that's really all I want to try to accomplish tonight. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to be talking about prophets and prophecy, how to understand who they are and what they were trying to do. Next week, we're going to study like Micah, particularly. Who is this guy? What's his situation? What's this book about? Overview. And then we're going at it. 7 chapters. Chapter 1, chapter 2, we're going to break it down. Look at the verbs. Look at how it all kind of fits together. Look at what's being talked about. And then try to figure out, okay, so how does this apply to us? And we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to go into Habakkuk. Who is he? Who is he writing to? What's that all about? And then we're going to look at Habakkuk and then wrap it up. So that's going to be the kind of the flow of our time together during this semester. I want to begin with this much deeper question. When you look at the Bible, do you consider it to be a seamless work? Where it's, it's one, I know there's different books, but it's really one story. It's got one central idea. Or do you look at the Bible and it's really disconnected? Yeah, like God starts doing this thing and that doesn't work out well. But God's really smart. And so he tried to do something different and well, that didn't work either. And so he had to flood the world. But then he really thought he was going to figure this out. And so he has this nation and he caught them out and he really helped them because they were slaves and he really loves people. And so he took them out of there and then he gave them a land, but then they messed that all up. So God finally said, I should try this love thing. So I sent my son and then they killed him. What were they thinking? And most people, and when I say that, I'll begin by myself. I kind of grew up believing that the Bible were these disconnected stories. Hey, do you want to hear a story about courage? Daniel, David, I guess Noah was kind of brave. You want to have a book about like faith? Like Abraham, he's really, really good. Integrity, Joseph, that's a great guy. So the Bible gives us all these really cool examples about people and they become models for us. And if we try to live like David and Daniel, then we'll be able to figure this out and we can be better people. That's what the Bible's about. That's a disconnected understanding of the Bible. The Bible's not actually disconnected. It is our job to look at the seamless nature of the Bible, meaning that there is one story, not many stories. There's one point, not many points. And although, and I'll put this as another way of describing it, although creation is a big part of God's plan in terms of its origin, its break, and its redemption and restoration, that the Bible fundamentally is about the Creator, who he is and what his plan is. And when we look at the Bible as a disconnected story about a broken humanity and how they're trying to figure things out, you're going to fundamentally get God, his purposes, his plan, and his redemption wrong. And you'll always be frustrated. I would argue that. I've always been frustrated as I've tried to connect the disconnected pieces. And the problem was, fundamentally, I didn't understand the nature of the Bible. The nature of the Bible is about God and about his creation and about how we broke it. But that's okay because God, not just in his smartness, but in his fullness, I got this. Yeah, but what about when, hey, calm down. I got this. So that when a young man and a young woman who have 3 young children, and I'll pretend they're women so you don't ever think it's me I'm talking about. When when someone goes through a family crisis, and we're sitting there trying to figure out what's going on when it seems like our world is spinning away, that same God looks at me and doesn't go, be more like Daniel. Come on, you can be like Abraham. I'm ready to sacrifice all 3 of them, right? You can do it. God says, I got this. You didn't think I knew about this? You don't think this is part of my plan? You think somehow I'm getting caught off guard? Don't you see how this fits in? It fundamentally gives us the word, God's word, back holistically. And hopefully that's what we're going to be able to see tonight. And so let's take a look at, and I don't have a copy of the syllabus in front of me, so let me just kind of see where you guys should be. You should be, yeah, right there. Page 4, actually, not page 1. Page 4. I'm going to try to cram a bunch of notes for you on that tiny little page. I only have 12 pages of notes. So, are you ready, Curtis? Okay, good. So here we go. Number 1, the role of the prophet. It's good to understand who he is, because you don't open up the Bible and all of a sudden you see God made Adam and he was a prophet. No, God made Adam and he really wasn't a prophet. And so we're going to look specifically at who the prophets were, and then I'll show this is how they kind of fit into Israel's history, okay? So here, the number 1 thing that we actually, in terms of, you see the role of the prophet. First of all, it's hard to find like common denominators of who the prophets really ultimately are. They're not like priests where they come from one line. It's not like a family pedigree. It's not a class within society. You'll actually find some that come from wealthy families and some that come from poor families. Some that come from noble tribes and some that come from what they would consider like, hey, I'm from the least of these tiny little tribes. I'm like a nobody. Like, why would God pick me? Which sounds like how God picked everybody in the Bible. God loves to say these things, and notice how this fits well with prophets. I always want you to know that I chose you because I chose you. That's God's answer most of the time, by the way. I didn't choose you, he says to the Israelites, because you were the biggest of all the tribes. I didn't choose you because you were the smartest or the cutest. I chose you because, now that I think about it, because I chose you, is how he describes his choosing of Israel. That is very much like the prophets. You will actually see when you look at the prophets as a whole, they were, many of them, quiet thinkers, some eccentric dreamers, others political activists, many of them fierce accusers, and some gentle encouragers. I'm going to give you a text I want you to write down. If you have your own Bible, you might want to look at these, but we got a lot of scripture that I want to kind of read to you so that you get a sense of how this fits from God's word itself. Let me give you a verse of scripture to write down. 2 Kings 17, verse 13. 2 Kings, which, by the way, 2 Kings is a book that in the Jewish Bible fits in a section called the former prophets. Well, I thought that's a book of history. Sure. You have the former prophets, like 1 Kings and 2 Kings and 1 Samuel. That would be the former, and then the latter prophets. That would be, we divide it up in our Christian Bible a little different than the way the Jewish people do. They consider 2 Kings to be the former prophets, which, by the way, the Kings material has people like Elijah, Elisha. What are they? Prophets. Never wrote anything. They just said and did amazing things, but they never wrote down anything. But 2 Kings 17, verse 13 says this: Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by, so that's important. How did he do it? By, it says, every prophet and every seer, meaning someone who could look into God's plan or purposes, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers and that I sent to you by my servants, the prophets. In that small little text, God points out that I am the one that not only made you, and this is where the seamlessness of the Bible pointing primarily to God, and then after God, back to his creation, that God spoke through the prophets. God is revealing himself to his people through the prophets. So number one, we need to understand that a prophet is in fact God's messenger. Okay? Now this is, by the way, really, really important, and I would say even more so in a cultural time, and I don't think ours is that radically different from many other times in human history, because human history is a really, really long time, where people have a hard time listening to authority. I know that it might be maybe a little more difficult now than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I love reading old books back from like literally in the 1600s or in the 1800s, where preachers are lamenting over the fact that no one takes me seriously. No one cares about the fact that I'm a preacher of God's word. And I'm like, really? I thought that started in the 60s, in Berkeley. I thought that's when it started. But no, it's actually an ongoing thing. People have never really liked authority. So we might want to say it's more complicated now. As we're going to look tonight and through the next, in our Wednesday night study, when you say you're God's messenger, that's never really been a popular thing. Okay? God is the one who originates this. And it's a really big deal. So be careful claiming it. I am God's be very careful claiming it. I am God's messenger. Are you sure you want to continue down this road? So be careful claiming it, but also be very careful rejecting it. It's a complicated thing. Be very careful just making that statement, and be very careful just going, oh yeah, what do they know? God is the messenger. The most basic understanding of a prophet was somebody that was actually sent by God. In the near ancient world, kings would actually send out decrees or laws through messengers, and those messengers would go, and they would be the ones that would stand in the place of a king. I'm listening right now. You can write this down onto the side and listen to it. It's a fascinating podcast called Hardcore History. Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. And I'm listening to his podcasts are rather long, like 5-6 hours each segment. And right now I'm finishing up one called King of Kings. And it's actually about all of the kings between Cyrus the Great, so the first of the great Persian kings, all the way to Alexander the Great. So that period of time between the Persians all the way to the Greeks. And as he is describing this history, it is just rich and it is absolutely robust. And the number of times these great kings would send out like messengers that would then proclaim to these lesser vassal states what they expected of them. And that's how that worked. And by the way, one of the things that these lesser states like to do sometimes was kill the king's messengers. And then it got complicated fast. When one of the great kings had all of his people killed, he sent these people down to Egypt. And King Darius, he sent all these people down to Egypt and tried to give them a message. They killed them all. He came down and slaughtered most of Egypt for doing that to the messengers. But you need to realize, like in this context of the Old Testament, it was very common for people to stand up. I have a message from the king. You need to listen to this and listen carefully to this. And it comes with promise and it comes with judgment should you fail. So the prophet standing up to speak was something that in this culture would have been at some level recognized as someone who is speaking on behalf of someone else. These messengers almost always spoke like literally just like orally, like they spoke. It wasn't like, hey, I've got a book for you to read. No, they would, especially when they didn't have books. It was a message that was given and therefore a message that needed to be heard and a message that then needed to be obeyed. God commissioned prophets during a particular time, and I think this is important for you to know. One way to think about it, think about in a marriage, because a marriage is going to be a very important paradigm to look at this material. Andrea and I get married, and we just think, oh man, we love each other so much. Why'd you marry her? Because she's the prettiest girl in the world. That's why. Anything else? No? Well, she's nice too, but man, I really love her. I can't imagine living without her. Okay, do you think you guys are going to have problems? Well, we've heard about problems. We've heard about difficulties. Can't imagine them ever happening to us. And so we just kind of go all excited. You know, it's August of 1989, and just what could ever go wrong? And so we're just all excited. A really good pastor would probably say to us, hey, by the way, when you have problems, you might need to sit down and talk with somebody, kind of like a counselor, you know, that will help you kind of stay true to your marriage vows. Stay true to the ideals that you have right now in your marriage. Now, in that context, that's kind of when the prophets come in, when Israel or Judah are deciding, yeah, I don't know if I really like this marriage with Yahweh anymore. I don't know if I want to follow. I don't know if I want to obey. I'm thinking about, starting an affair with somebody. And it's at that moment. So you need to realize, like when and not only, but in a primary place, you will see the rise of the prophets increase when the people are on a radical decline in terms of their relationship with Yahweh God. So there is a sense in which God is saying, hey, let me show you how much I love you. You don't have to try to figure this out on your own. Like, I know that on August 19th, 1989, you were married, and I know that you probably still have the video somewhere, but it's on a VHS tape. What are we supposed to do with that? But I'm here to remind you of that marital promise. To do that is a sign of love. Notice how God doesn't go, hey, like I told you what to do, and if you're not going to listen, you're not going to listen. I mean, do you realize like how much it doesn't have to be in him to chase after us and to help us? You do realize like God in his nature is complete. Like he's not sitting there going, I sure hope Tom loves me. I just won't be the same God if Tom doesn't love me. You know, he's not like that. Like the love that he has for us, the pursuit that he has for us, for this marriage relationship that he initiated. Can you believe it, that he would love us after all we've done? And then after we decide, who needs him anyway? God goes, yeah, I'm not going to give up on you. See, if you don't have that idea, that's the seamless idea of God's pursuit of his creation. And when things start going bad, he is the first one. Listen, married couples, he is the first one to say, yeah, you may have forgotten what's going on. I have not. I will pursue you. And he does this with prophets. Now, when those prophets come, God's people are expected to obey as though Yahweh were speaking himself. So when we're reading Micah and we're reading Habakkuk, and you get this, thus saith the Lord. You almost need the King James, right? Thus saith the Lord. It's like, okay, this is like serious. This isn't somebody going, how can we put this? God's saying, tell them this. Let me give you some great ideas. I want to read to you from Isaiah chapter 6, verses 8 through 13. Again, you can either turn there and read it with me, or let me read it to you. Listen to how one prophet who has been called by God to go, he goes. First of all, he's amazed. He's in the presence of God. He's absolutely amazed. He says, I don't think I can do this. God cleanses him. An angel comes down and touches his mouth with a burning hot coal, and he cleanses him. And I heard a voice from the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And then I said, Isaiah speaking, here am I, send me. He said, go and say to this people, keep on hearing, but never understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and they're blind, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. And then I said, how long, O Lord? And he said, until the cities lie waste, without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is desolate waste, and the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land, and though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak. A terebinth is a tiny little oak tree, or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is a stump. So, how long am I going to do this? Until all the bad things that I say are going to happen come true. And Isaiah goes, I'll go. He's a willing prophet. Listen to what Jeremiah says about this. O Lord, speaking about his calling, okay? O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. You are stronger than I, and you have prevailed, for I am a laughingstock all day. Everyone mocks me. For whenever I cry out or I speak, violence and destruction. For the word of the Lord has become for me a reproach, a derision all day long. But if I say, I will not mention him, I will not speak of his name anymore, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot. For I hear many whispering, terror is on every side. Denounce him, meaning Jeremiah. Denounce him. Let us denounce him. Say all my close friends, watching for my fall. Perhaps he will be deceived. Then we will overcome him and we'll take our revenge on him. But the Lord is with me like a dread warrior. Therefore my persecutors will stumble. They will not overcome. They will be greatly ashamed, for they will not succeed. Their eternal dishonor will never be forgotten, O Lord of hosts, who tests the righteous, who sees the heart and the mind. Let me see your vengeance upon them. That sounds like a prophet, right? For to you I have committed my cause. It's interesting to just understand the prophet. O Lord, you have deceived me, and I was deceived. How long, O Lord, until all the terrible things I tell you stand true? So in my world, I know a lot of people that want to, when I was teaching at the college, who want to teach if it means that their ministry will grow and they'll be popular and they'll really kind of get a sense that they're making a difference. I think about Jake and Aaron Moore, right? Going to Ethiopia. preaching and waking up and preaching and teaching and just caring for the sick people in Ethiopia. And as far as I know, there was never a church of like 20,000 people. Most of the people were probably grateful for them, but said no thank you to their message. How long, O Lord? Till I tell you to come home. I think about Mac and Liv getting ready to go to Poland. Because why? Because you think it's really going to be amazing. I know that God will be amazing, but I have no idea what else is going to happen. We just sent Rachel and Sam Martin to Japan. Because it's going to really blow the doors off, right? Like, can you imagine? I don't know. I pray for that. I pray that many come to hear the Lord. But we don't send them for success. We send them because God said, am I not worth this? How long, O Lord? Answer, Mackenzie, till God tells you to come home. And you go and you serve there. Our son Matthew goes to Mexico. How long? Till the Lord tells you can come back. Until that, you love the people of Mexico. So those things are at the heart of the prophet, and there is a weighing down, but when you're God's messenger, one of my favorite statements is, I love that line, but Yahweh is with me like a dread warrior. And I need a dread warrior if I'm going to stand up and speak and take derision and accusation. They are God's messengers. Number two, they are God's attorneys. Now that might be kind of strange, especially in our culture today where attorneys, kind of like, not a good word, my apology to the attorneys, because I love you personally, okay? But it does. And we have lawyer jokes, right? And they didn't quite have lawyers like we do in our modern context. But I love it's very, very real. There is in the mouth of the prophet an indictment. I mean, they're a prosecutorial attorney. They're not like a defense attorney. They're not coming to the aid of humanity. No. They're actually coming on behalf of God. And they have an indictment. Prophets enter the story, obviously, when God's people have forgotten or ignored his law. And by the way, both are deadly. Either to forget or to ignore. Remember that. Like when you're reading this seamless story, we love to do this. Yeah, but I didn't know. I mean, people were joking around about that being a syllabus. I can't tell you the number of times students, I had no idea it was due. I mean, you had a syllabus. Yeah, I didn't, it was, no. Those weren't even words at the end of your sentence. What was that? Yeah, you're responsible. Okay, God has revealed himself. Therefore, you are responsible. So these attorneys come up. Prophets take up Yahweh's case against those who have threatened. So by the way, it's not just, there are innocent people in this when we're reading the prophets. But those who are threatening God's relationship with his people, there is an accusation against them. Hear me up. Parents or leaders, teachers, when you speak, when you act, are you somehow supporting God's plan and purpose of restoration and redemption? Or are you opposing it? And the prophet is the one and it's not just the people. That's why when you think about it, when Israel said, hey, we need a king. We really want a king. I'm here as an ambassador for God. And I got a message for you. What does David do? Think about it. This is a good sign of David, right? What does he do? Humbles himself, doesn't he? You're here? Yahweh sent you? Okay, what do I need to hear? He got it. And by the way, it's not because Nathan was this big person. It's important for us to realize that when Micah speaks or Habakkuk speak, they're not going, yeah, I got a PhD, you should listen to me. They're going, no, I was just in the center of the throne of the King of the universe. He told me there's some issues you guys need to hear. And kings bow down, right? Kings get a sense that, okay, Yahweh is speaking. So their goal then was to bring Yahweh God's people back to him, and particularly to their covenant agreement. That is going to be critical. That God has a creation that has rebelled against him, but through covenant, particularly the covenant of the law of Moses, the Mosaic law, the people of Israel have entered into an agreement with Yahweh God. And now, they're married 20 years and they just don't know. I've had way too many people ask this question. Is God going to still hold me responsible for that, that I promised thing I did 20 years ago? Yep, he is. So the law of Moses is something I want to remind you of, and the prophet is the one that speaks that. Why? The prophet is, on behalf of God, is bringing the relationship back together. Do you see how this is so much more than, I thought it was just kind of really cool things in the future? It's actually like the ultimate plan of the seamless work of God is the foundational covenantal relationship bringing back is the role of the prophet. So that's how important and critical that is. So let me read to you the words of Micah chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Listen to the indictment. We'll come up across this when we read Micah 6. Here is what Yahweh says. Arise, plead your case before the mountains, and let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the indictment of Yahweh, and you enduring foundations of the earth. For the Lord has an indictment against his people, and he will contend with Israel. I thought God loved us. Think about this statement. This is why I love the way the prophets speak. It's kind of like mountains, ocean. I want you to be here and be the witnesses for this. For I have an indictment. Unless you get a sense that we have truly wronged him, you never really get a true sense of his amazing grace. The Old Testament prophets give us this. See, one of my concerns, and the preaching on the conversion of Paul, the problem is that when you're preaching about conversion, most people are going, yeah, but I'm lovable anyway. Like, honestly, who wouldn't send their only begotten son, to die in their place to get me? Like, I'm awesome. Right? Like, come on, tell me you wouldn't give your kid for me. That's how we think of it. The prophets come and say, well, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, there's a legitimate indictment against you. The prophets are attorneys. Lastly, the prophets are predictors. So there is a sense in which there is foretelling that exists. So speaking of the future, I want to say, though, be very careful, like seeing that as the primary, but there is a prophetic, we even say that, a prophetic element. Well, but prophecy is so much more than just foretelling, meaning the future, foretelling. It's so much more than that. But there is a predictive element, but why? Here's why. God gave his prophets this insight into, are you ready for this? Not future, I really want to kind of change your thinking. God doesn't go, hey, guess who's going to win the Super Bowl? Like, that's kind of how we think about it. We go, yeah, but it's more important than the Super Bowl. It's like whether or not your career is going to kick off, or whether or not your kids are going to be successful. Is there anything more important in the world than Jim Johnson's kids being successful? Yeah, like lots of things. Truly, lots of things. So what could God give me that's more important than what's going to happen to me next year? His plans. Like his plan, that's the seamlessness of it. The seamless work of God is, I want you to see my playbook. Because if you don't look at my playbook, what you're going to do is you're going to have a disconnected view of me, and you're going to have lots of little stories about people who've sometimes succeeded and sometimes failed. And you're going to try to be like them. Dare to be a Daniel. That's not the point. The prophets, God goes, hey, I want you to see my playbook. And I want you to help my people. This is, again, like an amazing measure of God's grace. Not only does he have a relationship with us through this covenant, but then when we break it, he says, I want you to see ultimately how I'm going to win you back. I want you to see how I'm going to bring you back. And that's the kind of future element that he's giving them. Okay? It's not, this is the problem. It's not judgment, you're bad. Although that is part of it, but it's a deeper undercurrent, which is, it is judgment to bring you, because that you is not just Jim, it's all of the Canadians. It's not just David, it's all of Israel. And it's not even just all of Israel. Because of God's promise to Abraham, it's all of the world. And so the prophets get an insight, not into who wins the Super Bowl, but why are we even playing one? And how do all these things fit? It just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. That's what God is driving at here. I want you to know my plans for judgment against those people who've turned against me, so that you collectively can get a deeper, truer sense of who I am. How many of you, hate to admit it, are grateful for those people who've made mistakes? Because I'm not doing that. Anybody? I'm not going to live like that. I saw how that worked for them. That was crazy. Yeah, I'm gonna find a new way to make this work, you know? I'm gonna stick this out. Why? Because, man, I've got all these. So God is pulling these things together. The second thing is, predicting the future was one of those things that differentiated the true God of the universe, Yahweh himself, from the false gods that existed. What was the fundamental difference between this God and the gods? Well, fundamental difference is this existed, these did not. How do you demonstrate that? We'll see it. We'll read this in a second. How do you know that? Because this one is going to tell these ones what's going to happen in the future. Why don't you guys try that? That's what's happening whenever there's a standoff between gods. Okay, why don't you talk about the future? Baal, go. Marduk, your turn. Anything? Nothing. And I don't just mean not verbally speaking, because you go, well, yeah, but isn't that true now? Like, okay, Yahweh, do something. He's not my errand boy, nor yours. So he will speak when he wants to speak, and he has. At Mount Carmel, remember that one? Let's do this, Baal. And you know this? I got to sneak this in here. Do you realize that Elijah picked Baal's specialty, so to speak? Baal, the weather god, who loves to send thunderbolts. Elijah goes, okay, you guys think you're playing with the home team here. So I'll tell you what, we'll do this thing. You guys think Baal's awesome and he's the god? Okay, get him to send fire, go. And then he stands there and he mocks him, and Baal doesn't exist, so there's nothing. And then he goes, let me tell you about Yahweh. And fire comes down and consumes. See, that's the it's not just prediction, it's a verification that differentiates the true God from the other ones. Some prophecies are short term. Here's what's going to happen by the end of next year, by the end of this, so some of it is short time. Sometimes these prophets speak deep into the future. Some of the prophets that we're going to even see in Micah and Habakkuk go beyond us. But hear me, it is tied into the plan, not tiny little slivers. It's a little one of the promises, or one of the problems of thinking about a messianic prophecy, like where Jesus is going to be born, Bethlehem. And he's going to go down to Egypt, because that's, Hosea. Sure, like that's one way to look at it, but we taught a class recently on messianic prophecies, and it runs a whole lot deeper than just these few little verses here and there. There's an undercurrent about what this Messiah was going to be like, and he's going to be a suffering servant, and that he's going to be this one that comes in the figure of Moses, and he's going to be greater than David, and he's going to be a king, and so there's all these subcurrents. It's not just a verse, and it says in Bethlehem. There's so much more going on. Because why? Because God's not, think about it, like God doesn't need to prove himself. I do, so you'll like me. Right? God doesn't have that. So every time he fights for us, every time he seeks after us, every time he bears with us, it's his kindness, it's his love, and it's his grace, not his neediness. I'll give you a couple of quick statistics. Less than 2, according to Douglas Stewart, an Old Testament scholar, less than 2% of the Old Testament is messianic prophecy like this, like you'll be born in Bethlehem and that you'll tell parables. Less than 2% is messianic prophecy. Less than 5% describes the new age that we live in. Less than 5% of these. And most likely less than 1% of the Old Testament prophecies contain prophecies that still are yet to be fulfilled. What does that mean? It means that the vast majority of Old Testament prophecies have already been accomplished. Isn't that fascinating? The vast majority have already been accomplished. Well, then what's the point? Remember, God's not trying to prove himself to anybody. That's not what he's not doing this to prove himself to you. He doesn't need to prove himself to us. He's doing this for a much deeper purpose. A much deeper purpose. To remind us of who he is, his plan, his covenant, and ultimately where that is going for our restoration and redemption. So when we're reading Micah and Habakkuk, or even when we're reading much of prophecies, even in the New Testament, many of them look back at what God has done, not just forward. Okay? That's critical. Much of the prophecies look back at the trueness of God. See, the problem is that you're more excited, or can be, hear me, I'm not trying to be too critical of this, but we can be more excited about some really cool, insightful future type thing than we can be in God himself. Can't we? You know people, how many of you know somebody that gets real excited about prophecy because it's like they got a key to the future? You know those people? Can I just trump that? Like, truly, just blow that out of the water? Let me tell you who God is and his plan. It always is bigger than just these tiny little things. The events feed into God's revelation of himself so that he would be known and worshiped. So the vast majority of what we're going to read focuses on that. Listen to Isaiah chapter 44, verses 7 through 8. Who is like me, God speaking? Let him proclaim it. Let him declare and set it before me, since I appointed an ancient people. Let them declare what is to come and what will happen. Fear not, nor be afraid. For have I not told you from of old and declared it? And you are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? There is no rock, I know not any. And what is God saying? If somebody wants to get into a contest describing how the future is going to go, like I have given to you through my prophets, let's do this. And the answer is, no one stands in opposition, because only Yahweh God can speak like that. The primary purpose of prophecy, write this down because it should be there in your notes. The primary purpose of prophecy is to call Yahweh God's people back to their covenant promise. Happy anniversary. Let's do this again. I promise to love you for the rest of my life. To have and to hold from this day forward. It reminds us back. It's calling us back. And that is the primary purpose of the prophets. Not to tell you who's going to win Stanley Cup, as exciting as that might be, but really who God is, our relationship with him. New Testament prophets are going to do the same thing. I want to remind you of your covenant. Literally, think about it this way for us on this side of the cross. Prophets, whenever anyone, God could appoint, but anybody that speaks prophetically for God to you, if they don't remind you of your baptism and all that meant, they're not a good prophet. Every Sunday, what do? We're reminded of our baptism, aren't we? We're reminded of like what that meant, like our commitment to him. We're reminded of that in terms of who he is and what it's all about. So, what are some of the characteristics of prophecy? First of all, number one, there's this covenant basis. If you don't get this, I do, you may kiss the bride kind of a feel, then you don't get what's happening. If you don't get a sense that when the Bible describes kind of the idolatry issue that's happening, see, idolatry is adultery, because covenant stands central. So when Israel goes after other gods, that's adultery. And adultery is not something that is good to maintain a marriage relationship, is it? It breaks it. Totally breaks it. So what is God doing? God is reminding them through the prophet of their covenant promise. The prophets give evidence of what the accusations are against the people. So the prophet, as that attorney, I'm here, and here's the evidence against you. And so we'll get a lot of that in Micah and in Habakkuk. Here is the evidence that says, yeah, I have not been faithful. As Israel and Judah turned from Yahweh, they also turned from his demand for social justice. What we're going to see in the prophets is kind of this twin approach. Number one, you have abandoned God. You do not worship him or obey him. That's the fundamental problem, okay? If we want to call it something, there is a real strong idolatry of belief. And then on the heels of that, which if you think about the Ten Commandments go like this. Love the Lord your God. You need to have no other idols besides him. And don't murder, and don't commit adultery, and don't steal, and don't covet. Well, how do those things fit together? Well, actually, like side by side. Like if you have no other gods before him, you steal when you have another God but God. You decide to take another man's wife or anybody you want or another woman's husband when you're not happy with what God gave you. I steal because I'm not happy with what God gave me. I covet because why? I don't like the way God's got this. I like your stuff better than my stuff. These are intimately connected. Social justice, meaning caring for those and doing what is right, is deeply tied to our understanding and obedience to who God is. Now, right now we live in an age where everything's social justice. There can be a real problem when you go for social justice, but you don't have a reason to go for it. I.e., it's just about humanity. Well, then it just becomes different versions of exploitation and manipulation. The proper way is, this is who God is. Therefore, this is how he has made us. Therefore, this is how we treat each other. See, that's why we shouldn't be surprised, like when you're reading in the law. You've heard me say this. For those of you who've been around for a long time, you've heard me say this over and over and over again. One of my favorite laws is that if you have a field and you're going to, you know where I'm going with this, Kay, right? If you have a field and you're going to plant your crops in your field, when you harvest it, whatever you do, you better not harvest it to the edge. You leave that. Leave a little bit around the edges. Will you do that? Leave a little bit around the edges. Why? Now here, like I guess the implied is so that other people, especially those that don't have a field as nice as mine, can come and get some food, right? That's not what he says. Guess why he says they should do that? For I am the Lord your God. That's why. And then, by the way, he says, and I was the one that brought you up out of Egypt. Like I was the one that saw you in need and cared for you. And you know what God does in his field? He doesn't harvest all the way to the edges and get everything. He leaves some for you. Therefore, when you have a field, whatever you do, like if you're going to be like God's farmer, you better not harvest to the edge. Leave some. Why? Because God is in fact God. The last thing that is very interesting about covenant is the prophets accuse Israel and Judah of religious ritualism. This one hit me when I was kind of going over this. One of the most offensive things to God, he likes to talk about how it's like an offense in his nostrils in sense because the burning of incense and the burning of sacrifices was meant to go up so that God would be pleased. And God said, it just makes me sick. Like just that smell of the idols just makes me, or of the sacrifices just makes me sick. You want to know why? Because the people are down there going, wow, God must be impressed. Like I'm still living my life the way I want. Like I'm going to do what I want to do, but I'm going to go to church on Sunday, and I'm going to give a little bit in the plate, and I'm going to just I'm going to just throw God a quarter. I don't care, $20 bill, whatever you want to put it. I don't care. And I got God. Guess it right here, back pocket. That religious ritualism, and again, what I have just been overwhelmed with, just even in the last few weeks preparing for this, do you have any idea who we're talking about here? This is the one that made everything. How could we sit here on Sunday and think that somehow with the little things that we do, going on, whatever good thing you can do, you think you can get God in your pocket by just doing some things so that he is the one that owes you? That kind of attitude is something that God just became so angry with. Jeremiah 7, I won't read from that, but it's one of my favorite chapters in the Old Testament. It's the one that Jesus quotes when he's cleansing out the temple. How dare you live any way that you want, and then you run in the church building and go, this is the temple of the Lord, this is the temple of the Lord, this is the temple of the Lord, and then walk out as though what you did in here had no effect on how you live out there. You fool. Honestly, I would argue the worst thing you can do is not to reject God, but to somehow think that he owes you. Truly. The Bible really wants, I would rather, God says, I would rather you be hot or cold. But the fact that you are lukewarm, what? I will spit you out of my mouth. Wow, that's intense. He takes this worship thing really seriously, doesn't he? See, you're not covenantally faithful when you rub it in somebody's face. Jeremiah 5, verses 28 and 29. Listen to this. They have grown fat and sleek, speaking about these religious people. They know no bounds in deeds of evil. They judge without justice, the cause of the father and the cause of the fatherless, to make it prosper, and they do not defend the rights of the needy. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? And shall I not avenge myself on this nation? In Micah chapter 6, verses 7 and 8, will the Lord be pleased with 1,000 rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. That's in Micah. Now, by the way, it doesn't mean that he doesn't want good worship. You think somehow you can just kind of keep your heart from him? And you might as well leave. It'd be better for you in judgment. Isaiah chapter 1, verses 11 through 13. What is to me this multitude of your sacrifices, says the Lord? I've had enough of your burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required of you this trampling of my courts? Bring me no more vain offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Sabbaths and the calling of convocations. I cannot, listen to this, I cannot endure iniquity and solemn assembly. Think about that. I cannot endure iniquity, sin, and solemn assembly. It's not that God can't deal with sin. He can, can't he? How? Through repentance and humility. God will not endure iniquity with solemn assembly. Do not pretend you're more than you are. Do not hide your sin, particularly from God. He cannot endure. Those are the words of the prophet. Two final things in our last 2 minutes. Okay, Mackenzie, I owe you. My son bet me in my office I wouldn't get through all this material. So I don't remember what we bet, but I still got 5 pages. I don't think I'm going to get through it. So I owe you, Mac. Number 2, judgment. Judgment. This is obviously a big, huge part, but notice how it's not number 1. Number one is covenant. Number two is judgment. Now, here's the big thing I want you to remember. Judgments are conditional. That's the biggest shock. Judgments are conditional. Think about it. If Jonah had been called to preach prophecy that was a judgment against Nineveh, and he knew that it was going to be irreversible, he would have gone. Right? What did he know? What did Jonah know? Jonah knew, I'm going to go tell them what's going to happen, and I know what's going to happen. They're going to get scared, and they're going to feel bad, and they're going to repent, and God, because I know him, he's going to forgive them. I'm not going. See, that's so important that you realize. That, by the way, why is that so critical? Because what it shows us is that the heart of the covenantal warning to bring them back is designed truly to bring them back. Like God doesn't want to. This is why the Bible describes God as rich in mercy and willing to forgive and quick to forgive. If you don't have this, see, this is where it's interesting. The view of the prophets will give you a deeper appreciation for the love and the grace of God. Because you'll go, wow, God puts up with and puts up with and puts up with. Where do we get that from? Right here. These judgments are conditional. Jonah chapter 3, verse 4. Jonah began to go into the city. Hold on. My eyes are kind of through me here. And he called out. So here's what he called out to the people. Yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. But he said that knowing that because Nineveh wasn't overthrown, was it? It wasn't overthrown. Does that mean that Jonah's prophecy didn't happen? No, it did happen. Because the prophecy of Jonah was to bring about the repentance of the Ninevites. That's important to remember. Last, Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 7 through 10. I love this statement. This is we'll conclude here. I'll have to draw a line and come back next week and deal with the language issue. But listen to this final thing about judgment. This is really kind of neat. This is a great text. Jeremiah 18, verses 7 through 10. Listen to this. If at any time I declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will pluck it up and break it down and destroy it, and if that nation, concerning which I've spoken, turns from its evil, then I will relent of this disaster that I intended to do to it. And if at any time I declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will build it and plant it, if it does evil in my sight, not listening to my voice, then I will relent of the good that I had intended to do to it. Isn't that interesting? God said very, very clear, which drives at, and this is what I'll come back next week when we talk about it, what you're going to see is that what God obviously cares about most is faithfulness, which tells us the seamless story. It's about faithfulness. So God says, man, if I tell you it's going to be destroyed and it's not destroyed, that's because those people repented, and I'm willing to go with that. By the way, if I promise good and they decide to just reject me, then I will take that back as well. That's how God has always operated. And where do we see that? We see that in the prophets. When we come back next week, we will finish up with this issue of language, and then we will jump into Micah chapter 1. The rest of who the prophet Micah actually was. Hope this has been a challenge and helpful. If you have any questions, always more than willing to have conversations around the edges. Love you guys. We'll see you Sunday where we continue through the book of Acts. We will see you then.